By drawing on his skills as a fly fishing instructor, angling author, and biology professor, Gary Borger has developed a very special approach to fly tying. In this tape, Gary will show you how to look at the trout's food organisms with an eye to designing flies to imitate them. You'll learn how to select tools and materials, and Gary will demonstrate the techniques for tying dry flies, nymphs, and streamers. With Gary's directions, you'll share the fun and excitement of tying flies that will catch trout wherever you fish.
Hi, I'm Gary Borger. To many fly fishers, fly tying is an important component of the total angling experience. It's both an art and a science. With an eye for proportion, color, and texture, the fly tyer secures materials to the hook with thread to create the impression of an organism fish feed on. To do this, the tyer must look at the food organism from the fish's perspective and so becomes more aware of the rhythms of life in stream and lake. In this tape, you'll learn the techniques necessary to tie 90% of all flies. I'm also going to show you how to select materials so that the flies that you tie match the textures and colors of the naturals that fish feed on. This will enable you to catch more fish and obviously have more fun. If you look around my fly tying room, you see 25 years accumulation of materials and equipment. I didn't start out this way, and obviously you don't have to either. Because to tie most flies, you only need 5 basic tools and a modest selection of materials that need an arm and a leg. This is one of the tools. It's a vise, and it's used to hold the hook. I'm going to be tying with several of these on the tape, and so you'll get a chance to see how they work. You'll need a bobbin for holding the thread, a bodkin, which is nothing more than a needle set and a handle for applying head cement and picking out dub bodies and so on, scissors, of course, for cutting threads and materials, and a pair of hackle pliers for winding feathers and other materials onto the hook. The hook is the foundation of the fly, so you'll need to know some things about it. A hook consists of the eye, the shank, the bend, the barb, and the point. The space between the point and the shank is called the gap, and hook size is determined by the gap. Hooks come in a seemingly endless array of sizes, shank lengths, bend styles, eye designs, and wire sizes. Part of the fun of fly tying is selecting the ingredients of the fly, and as you become more involved in fly tying, you want to learn about all the hook styles so you can choose the best ones for your special tying needs. However, nearly all trout flies can be tied in only 2 hook styles. One is a hook such as Mustad's number 94840. This hook is used for dry flies, wet flies, and nymphs. While the most popular sizes are 10 through 18, you can begin your tying with only those sizes which you expect to use. The other hook is Mustad's number 9672. This hook is used for minnow imitations or elongate nymph patterns. Sizes 6 through 12 are most used. These hooks are both size 10. Note the difference in shank length. Once the appropriate hook is selected, then you have to select the materials. The most important consideration in this process is matching the properties of the materials, such as color and texture, to the properties of the natural organism. For example, the body of a mayfly may wave and undulate as it swims, so the materials you select for the fly should do the same when you fish it. These materials can be likened to the artist's palette or the threads and yarns of a weaver. They're blended to produce a fly of definite proportions, shape, color, texture, and with the ability to float or sink. When such a fly is fished with the correct angling tactic, it closely imitates the behavior and appearance of the natural. It'll take you a while to learn the properties of the materials and correlate those to the characteristics of the naturals, because you're going to have to look at both materials and naturals in a new way. But I'm going to be talking about these things as I'm tying flies, which, by the way, I think I'll start doing right now. The flies that I'm going to demonstrate in this tape begin with rather simple ones and progress to ones that are more difficult. The first vise I'm going to use has spring-loaded jaws which are operated with this lever cam. Simply squeeze it, insert the hook, and let go, and it holds the hook very firmly. Now when you clamp the hook in the vise, make sure you catch it back here on the bend of the hook. Don't bury the point like this. In some vices it's very difficult to work on the back of the hook if you do bury it, but more important is if you pinch the hook right there at the barb, you're liable to fracture the metal. And if you do, the point's liable to break off. That's no problem when you're tying flies, but if you use that fly to hook the biggest fish of your lifetime, it'll be a very sad occasion indeed. Make sure the shank of the hook is level when it's clamped in, and the jaws are clamped on it tightly. Now let me show you how to put the thread on the hook. I use a bobbin like this to hold my thread because it allows me to keep tension on the thread. See, I can just let go of it like that and it won't unreel and go down on the floor. And it also gives me a lot of control. I can use this and direct it to go anywhere I want. I hold the bobbin in my dominant hand, and since I'm right-handed, it'll be in that hand, and hold the free end of the thread in the other hand, then place the thread over the top of the hook shank, somewhere near its middle, and wrap forward in open spirals like this, right to the eye, and then right back over top of those spirals to lock the thread firmly on the shank. Then you simply clip away that free end and continue wrapping. Now notice when I wrap that it's not real jerky, it's very smooth, not like this, smooth and even. When you get back here, you've got to be careful because if you come around like this, watch the point now, see that? You could break the thread right off. So you have to sort of angle the bobbin in like this. And that's where the bobbin gives you immense control. Much easier to do this with a bobbin than if you're just holding the thread in your fingers. Wrap back until the thread has covered the entire shank, and if you let the bobbin hang down, the thread should hang down right across the barb just like that. I'm going to take this hook out and put in a fresh one so I can show you the knots used to finish the fly. And this sounds a little backwards, showing you the knots before I've even shown you any flies, but when you get to the end of the fly and you don't know how to tie it off, you're going to be in, you have a fit's what you'll have. You just wrap that up there, tie it down like that, and then I'll clip away that end. First knot I'm going to show you is called the double hitch. And to do this, you finish the fly, put your finger on the thread, bring the thread up around, and go 1.5 turns around the hook shank. Now you can see the yellow thread's coming off the top of the shank and the red thread is coming off the bottom of the shank. This is a special thread that I prepared just to show these knots. And I'm going to take this loop right around the eye of the fly so that the yellow thread stays on top and the red one stays on bottom. Just like that. And then draw the knot tight. And I usually wiggle it once or twice to tighten it down. Next knot I'm going to show you is a half hitch. It's a very simple knot. I usually use it only for situations where I want to tie something and then maybe clip away the thread and come back and do something later, but I need to secure that thread. Just lay your fingers on top of the thread. In this case, I'm using my right hand. And now watch, I turn my hand like this and lay the yellow thread on my side of the red one. Then hook that thread right behind, hold it with your finger, and draw it tight, just like that. Last knot I'm going to show you is the whip finish. It begins just like the half hitch. Lay your fingers on, turn. Now you can see again that the yellow thread is coming up on your side, and you place that right against the shank. And now I'm going to wrap the red one around the yellow one, around the shank, and leave the yellow one lying along the side of the shank. You have to watch my hand closely to see what's happening. Each time I go around, I rotate my hand in the loop to allow me to spin that red thread around the yellow one. Then I simply draw the loop tight. And the knot's finished. The first fly I'm going to show you is the fur bug. You'll learn how to apply a dubbed body and finish the head. Clamp the hook in the vise and wrap the shank with thread. Now, dubbing material is either soft fur or in some cases synthetic materials. In this case, I'm going to use some muskrat hide. And if you look closely at it, you can see there are stiff guard hairs sticking up above the dubbing fur. Just take your scissors and clip out a piece of that. Lift it off the hide. And then pluck out those guard hairs. They'll make it difficult for you to do your dubbing if you don't take them out. Then mix those fibers all around. They'll dub much better that way. Pull the thread down. Just take a small amount of dubbing, put it against the thread, and twist. Notice that I just twist in one direction. Don't try to use too much dubbing at one time. If you use a big gob, watch what happens. So it won't go on. Just use small amounts and spin it on there, twisting in that one direction. And then, if you want to make it thicker, spin some over the dubbing that you've already put on, spinning small amounts each time. By doing this, you can actually taper the dubbing and taper the body as you begin to put it on the fly. If you want, you can slide the dubbing right up. See that? Now we'll begin to wrap. As you lay the dubbing on, keep each wrap immediately ahead of the last one, like this. Now, if you didn't get enough dubbing on there, or suppose the body wasn't quite fat enough, we're going to make it just a little bit thicker. And one of the advantages of dubbing, you can just put more on. And just twist it on there. Wrap it on wherever you want. One of the problems that many people have in tying flies is not leaving enough room for the head of the fly. Figure that the head of the fly should be the same length as the eye. The head of the fly is the same length as the eye. Then wrap the thread around several times. You can build a nicely tapered head if you want. And then tie the knot. I use the double hitch for most of my flies. And I normally tie it twice just to make sure that the thread is very secure. And then work them back and forth to pull them tight before I cut it away. Then you want to put a little head cement on that. Make sure that the thread never comes unwrapped. And you apply this with the bodkin. Just touch it on like that. It'll soak right into the head, and the fly's finished. Natural dubbing can be any soft fibered fur such as beaver or muskrat, mink, otter, or rabbit. These have a wide range of textures and colors. These natural furs can also be dyed any color that you'd like. Acrylics and polypropylene make good dubbing also. These are probably the most used colors. As is, this fly could represent a midge pupa or a caddis pupa or other small insect, but if I take a dubbing needle and pick it out underneath, just pick it right out, it could represent a scud or freshwater shrimp. Here are a couple of variations on dubbed bodies. This one has a thin abdomen and a heavy thorax, which has been picked out. It's made of sparkle yarn dubbing just by pulling fibers out of sparkle yarn. And you notice that this gives a very translucent nature to the fly, which could represent very nicely a midge pupa or a caddis pupa. If I was trying to imitate a fly that had a strongly segmented body, like a caddis larva, for example, I might just wind a rib onto the fly. This is a soft tackle fly, and I'm going to show you how to add a tail and a soft tackle to the basic dubbed body. Now, this is a different vise that I'm using, and you can see that it's operated with a simple knob mechanism. You just twist that to lock the hook in place. For the tail, I'm going to use a few fibers from a wood duck flank feather. And I'm going to wrap these on the back of the hook to form the tail. Now watch this. If I just lay them on there and start to wrap, the thread simply crowds them out of the way. So I have to have some way to position them and hold them there while I'm wrapping the thread. I simply hold them in place, pull the thread up between my thumb and forefinger, pinch that, take it down the other side, and then pull. And when I do that, it pulls it right down against the hook shank. I do that 3 or 4 times, and then holding the tail so that it doesn't turn, wrap back over it until the thread is carried completely to the back of the shank. Then simply clip away the excess material. Now I'll add a dubbed fur body. When you do the dubbed body, leave extra room at the head. Notice that I've made the head this time about twice as long as we did last time. Now I've picked a feather from a grouse wing, and I want the fibers of the feather to be about the same length as the shank of the hook. Now you see all this fluffy material down at the bottom here. That has to be clipped away. Just cut that off with your scissors, and then cut the base fibers off like that to give you a secure base to wrap on. Lay that on there, and you can use the pinch technique again. Simply bind that down. Wrap the thread forward out of the way. Now we're going to wrap this feather around the hook shank. It's called a hackling feather. And I take my hackle pliers and grasp the feather like that, and then wind it around, trying to stand the fibers right out at right angles to the hook shank. Just like this. And each time I go around, I sort of just pull those back out of the way, and then tie the feather off. Clip away the excess, and finish the head of the fly. This soft hackle pattern is representative of many food organisms, so just tie it on whatever size the natural happens to be. It could represent a scud or a midge pupa or an emerging mayfly or just food in general. And again, we'd put a drop of head cement on it to make sure that the thread holds securely. Don't try to memorize these patterns like you would recipes for pies and cakes. Rather, learn the tying principles that I'm showing you and the properties of the materials. With these techniques and a familiarity with the materials, you can design flies to match the food organisms from your home waters. When you're doing this, strive to capture the living essence of the food organism rather than make an exact copy of it. Let me show you what I mean. This is the gold-ribbed hare's ear nymph. It's an excellent imitation for this mayfly, and also a very good imitation for just mayflies in general. In this fly, you're going to learn how to put on ribbing and a folded wing case. We'll also use all the other techniques that you've learned so far. For the tail of this pattern, I like to use fibers from a pheasant tail because they're the right color and the right thickness, and I normally use 4 or 5 of those. I don't really think that the fish count the tails. I'm trying to get the right amount of bulk. Then I'm going to add a piece of medium weight gold tinsel we're going to use for the rib. The body of this fly is made from dubbing taken from the mask of an English hare. In this case, we're going to leave the guard hairs in to give the body a shaggy appearance. You might have noticed by now that the thread that I'm using is brown. I mentioned before that I match the color of the thread to the body as much as possible. Now, when you're tying flies to match natural insects, you have to watch proportions very carefully. If a 6-foot man walked into the room and his head was only 5 inches long, you'd notice it right away. And trout can notice proportions too. So the abdomen of this fly should end just about the midpoint of the shank. And you notice as I wrap that rib forward, I only made about 4 turns. I don't want to crowd them too close together, otherwise the whole body will be ribbing. Then I'm going to tie in about 6 pieces of peacock herring to give me enough bulk for these wing cases. I like peacock herring for wing cases because trout find peacock herring particularly fascinating. I think it's because of the iridescence of the peacock herring. Just tie those right in on top of the shank like that, make it look like a big wing sticking out there. Then I'm going to add some more dubbing for the thorax. I want to make the thorax thicker than the abdomen. As you can remember the natural fly, the thorax, that is the region where the wing cases and the legs stuck out, was in fact thicker than the abdomen of the fly. So we'll just wind it on there and leave about twice as much space at the head of the fly that you normally would leave for a regular head. And we're going to add a soft hackle in there. This is the same way we tied the soft hackle fly. Prepared the feather in exactly the same way. Now if the feather breaks, throw the fly away, right? No. Let's come back and tie it down again. You have to learn to expect those kind of things. A couple of turns of hackle are all you really need because you're going to represent the legs of the fly with this hackle. Now, to make that folded wing case, we just pull these hackle fibers out to the side, grab a hold of the peacock, lay it right over the top. Use that pinch technique so they don't spin around. If you've left enough room at the head, you end up with a very nice looking fly. If the fly seems to have too many legs on it, just take your fine pointed scissors and cut some off the bottom. Now I want to show you how to tie the yarn stonefly nymph, and I'm going to illustrate how to make split tails and use yarn for the body. This is another vise that uses a cam mechanism to lock the hook in. Just squeeze it shut like that. Notice that I'm using a long shank hook because the nymph has a long body. And I'm just going to take some black yarn, this is a two-stranded yarn, and simply pull off some of the fibers and dub those right onto the thread. I'm going to use that small amount of dubbing to make a ball right at the back of the shank. Stoneflies have rather stiff tails, two of them that stick out one on either side, so I'm going to use these short, stiff fibers from the leading edge of a goose primary feather. And I'm going to tie them in, one on either side. Now you have to use the pinch method to do this. Lay them in there, pinch the thread, and you can tie it right in against the side like that. Now you see the use for that little yarn ball. It spreads the tails so they stick right out to the side, just like those of the natural. Because stonefly nymphs generally spend most of their time on the bottom, I'm going to add some lead wire to this fly to help sink it. And I'll start just slightly behind the center of the shank and simply wrap the lead wire forward. When weighting flies, I normally use lead wire that's about the same diameter as the diameter of the wire in the hook shank. And make sure those ends are crimped in well. Then take your thread and run it through there back and forth a couple of times to make sure that that lead is secured so it doesn't slide around or turn or anything. And then we're going to tie this yarn in. I've got one strand that I'm going to fold over so that I have two pieces. And when I tie it in, rather than tying it in right at the back, I'm going to let it stick forward a ways. Wrap back to that ball, and then wrap forward right over that yarn. If you just tied it in at the back, you'd have a big lump back there, but by doing this, the body is the same dimension all the way forward. Now, when you wrap yarn, one turn over the top, and then start to twist it. Each time you go around, give it a couple more twists. By doing this, the strands won't separate and you'll get a nicely tapered body. Wrap forward about halfway. A stonefly nymph has an abdomen that's about half of its body length. The thorax is the rest. Once that's tied down, I'm going to take a section from a turkey feather that's been lacquered with head cement and allowed to dry. And it's very flexible, you can notice, and the fibers won't separate. I just cut that out and snip it off and tie that in for the wing case. Now I've wrapped the yarn forward and put on a soft tackle. Then I'm going to take this lacquered piece of feather and just fold it right over the top to form the wing cases. Wrap over it a couple times loosely, hold the end up so the thread doesn't slide off, and then just pull it tight. Then go around 4 or 5 more times to make sure it's very secure, and finish the head of the fly. And again, I always try to taper the head. Stoneflies are creatures of fast, highly oxygenated water. The nymphs live up to 3 years. Because they have such a long life cycle, they're present all year long, and the trout are well aware of them. Now, stonefly nymphs are not good swimmers, so I like to fish the artificial by casting it upstream and allowing it to float dead drift back to me in the currents. When I'm fishing this kind of water, I work the pockets around boulders, places that stoneflies would live. They get into those niches and cracks in the bottom between the rocks. And when they're out crawling around, sometimes the currents knock them loose and they tumble and drift. And the trout are always watching for them. Fish on. Boy, they're strong. Really grab that stonefly nymph. Holy cow, do they take that thing. Oh boy, oh boy. That's why I like to fish those big old stonefly nymphs. That's a fly worth learning how to tie. Oh, they hold right in that strong current. All right, nice rainbow. Come on here, fish. Boy, it's catching nice fish like that that makes learning how to tie flies so worthwhile. Back in the water here. This next fly I'm going to show you is a dry fly. It's tied with a stiff fibered feather wound around the hook shank to help support the fly on the water's surface. This feather is taken from the neck or cape of a rooster. Here's what these capes look like. As you can see, they come in a wide range of colors and qualities. Selecting necks for your own tying could be confusing, but it doesn't have to be if you follow the same principles I discussed for selecting tools. Buy according to your tying needs and budget. Let me show you what I mean. Here are 2 types of necks that are on the market today. This neck is from a domestic rooster genetically bred for quality hackles. This is an imported non-genetic hackle. It's easy to see that the genetic neck has more feathers than the imported one, but the big difference is in feather quality. Let's look closer. Both these feathers are for a size 14 hook. This genetic feather is much longer and therefore easier to use. And overall, there are more stiff fibers, like this, on the genetic feather than on the imported one. These stiff fibers are what floats the fly. In addition, the genetic necks have an abundance of feathers for size 16 and smaller hooks. The imported ones have few, if any, feathers this size. As you might expect, genetic necks are more expensive than imported ones. Well, which one to choose? Ask yourself this: what size flies do I want to tie? If you tie flies that are between sizes 10 and 16, then you can get by with imported necks. However, if you also tie smaller size flies, you'll want genetic hackle. And let me tell you something, once you use these genetic quality capes, you'll have a tough time going back to the imported ones. There are 3 basic colors of hackle capes you'll need: brown, grizzly, and medium blue dun. As your tying needs expand, you can add other colors. This dry fly is a variant. It has only a tail, dubbed body, and a hackle without wings. The tail of a dry fly has to be very stiff to help support the fly on the surface of the water. So for the tail, I'm going to use the fibers from a hackling feather taken from the side of the cape. That would represent the throat of the chicken. And I just see how stiff they are? Grasp a handful of these and simply pull them off. And then form them into a little paintbrush like that. And I'm going to measure the tail. The tail should be as long as the shank of the hook, so I just hold it like that to measure it. Transfer hands. And tie it in. After the tail's in place, I dub on a thin body of yellow rabbit fur. Notice how much space I've left in front, nearly half the hook shank. Now I've got to select a hackling feather. And these, of course, are taken from the neck. And we want to be sure that the fibers on this feather are the same length as the hook shank. So again, we can just bend the feather and put it right up there and measure it like that. And then you have to prepare the base of the feather for tying in. We want to eliminate most of this soft webby material. The point at which you cut it off is the point at which the webbing extends no more than 1/3 the way out the barb. So we'll clip it off about right here. And then, like we did for the soft tackle, trim it on the base to give you some little stubs that'll help the thread hold that feather on when we tie it in. I'm going to tie the feather in, and I'm going to use 2 on this fly. Tie one in, and then tie the other one in. Don't try to tie them both in together. They're likely to slip when you try to wind the hackle. Tie them down securely. Using the hackle pliers, wind these hackles one at a time. Don't try to wind them together because they'll separate and you'll just get a mess. As you go around, turn that feather so it stands right up on the side of its side just like that, and the fibers come off perpendicular to the hook shank. Now, as you wrap forward, place each wrap immediately ahead of the last one. Don't run the feather back through the hackle again. Just keep winding forward smoothly with even, uniform tension. Get as many wraps out of the feather as you can, up to the head. Don't crowd the eye. Tie it off. Now, a lot of people have trouble wrapping this second feather, but it's not difficult at all. You wrap it exactly like you did the first one. Right through the other hackle. Wrap it right through, just like this, keeping it right up on edge. Wrap right up to the head. Now let me show you a really neat little trick. If I just cut right underneath here, I'm going to cut the thread off. So I'm going to take my index finger, lift that thread back out of the way. The thread's running over my index finger. Now I can run those scissors right in there and snip that fiber off, not cut the thread. Boy, does that save a lot of grief. Then I hold the hackle back out of the way so that I don't wrap it under. And finish the head of the fly. One of the interesting things about the variant is that it can be modified. You can turn it into another fly with 2 snips of the scissors. As is, it would represent a mayfly dun, perhaps a caddisfly, or some other insect that's floating on the surface of the water. But for one stage of the mayfly's life cycle, that is the spinner stage, the insect falls on the surface with its wings outspread. And so I can make 2 snips, one on the top and one on the bottom, and I've got a mayfly spinner with its wings outspread. Here's an interesting variation on the dubbed body and trimmed hackle theme. It's an ant. Just has a gob of dubbing at the rear of the hook, a thin thread body in the middle, 4 or 5 turns of hackle trim top and bottom, and a little gob of dubbing at the front. I normally tie it in black and rusty brown and sort of a clay color in sizes 10 through 18. Trout like ants. If they were gourmets, this would be the pièce de résistance of the meal. Give them a try. I'd like to show you what is perhaps the world's most popular dry fly, the Adams. It's tied just like the variant, except we're going to put on hackle tip wings. Begin this fly by wrapping the hook shank about 2/3 of the way back with thread and then bringing the thread forward to the 1/3 point. Then you have to select the wings. These are taken from the grizzly cape. They're 2 grizzly hackle feathers. Make sure they're wide enough so that when you put them on there, they'll show up nicely. Pull those out, and you'll notice that these feathers have a little natural curve to them. Place the 2 feathers back to back so that they diverge from one another. Line up the tips, and then simply measure them against the hook. You want the wings to be the same length as the hook shank. Pull the fibers down like that. Trim off the feather, giving yourself plenty of room for the base of the wing, and then simply clip away the fibers on either side of the base of the wings. And if you want, you can just measure it again, check to make sure. Now the wings are tied in pointing forward. Lay them up on top like that. Use the pinch method. Tie them in. Wrap the bases down solidly. Now we're going to stand the wings up and divide them. Just pull them upright. Wrap the thread in front several turns. Divide the wings, and then figure 8 the thread through. Wrap from back to front on that one, and from front to back on that one. And the wings are now in place. Once the wings are in place, the fly is finished just like the variant. It has a tail of mixed grizzly and brown hackle fibers, a gray body, and the hackle is 1 each of grizzly and brown. Be sure when you put that wing in that you don't get it any further forward than that 1/3 point. If you do, the fly will fall on its nose when you're fishing it. Here's another feather wing, tied from wood duck flank feathers. This is on Hendrickson, but it's also used on a light Cahill. Begin just like you did for the Adams, that is, wrapping the front 2/3 of the hook shank with thread, then carrying the thread back to the 1/3 point. And then we're going to take a wood duck flank feather like this. I like these because of their coloring and very nice modeling effect. Select about that many for this fly. Just snip that off. Roll it between your thumb and forefinger. And again, measure the wing length just like you did for the Adams. It should be the same length as the hook shank. And tie them pointing forward over the eye of the fly. Make sure they're well secured. Then we're going to divide that into 2 separate wings. Try to get about the same amount of fibers in each wing. And figure 8 through it, just like we did for the Adams. Now you notice this produces a little bit rougher wing than the Adams did, and I sort of like that because it gives more of the impression of a wing than a very distinct wing like the hackle tips on the Adams. Other flies that use hair wings would be those in the wolf series, like the royal wolf. Hair wings are very nice on flies because they're easy to see in low light conditions, and when you're fishing them on rough water, it makes them easy to see also. We're going to begin just like we did for the other two. Wrap the first 2/3 of the shank with thread, then carry the thread forward to the 1/3 point. And I'm going to select a calf tail. Now, make sure when you buy these that they have nice, long, uniform hairs, and that the hairs are rather fine in diameter. This is a size 10 hook, so I'm going to select a clump of calf tail about that size. Simply clip it from the hide, then hold it by the ends and pull out the soft, shorter material. We're going to measure it the same way we did for the other two wings, so that it's the same length as the hook shank, and secure it down with the pinch method. When you're tying in these hair wings, you got to make sure you get a lot of wraps on there so that it's well secured. Then divide it just like we did that wood duck wing, making sure there's about equal amounts on either side, and figure 8 through it. And after you figure 8, you may want to pull it back like this and wrap a few times in front. A lot of tyers like to put a big drop of head cement right in there at this point to help secure that hair, because sometimes it's a little unruly. And that's the hair wing. This is another vise which uses a side-mounted locking cam to close the jaws. I'm going to show you how to tie the woolly worm, which is perhaps the most used wet fly. The body can be chenille, or it can be dubbing, or it could be yarn. Its most used colors would be olive, black, brown, and yellow. In this one, I've tied in a grizzly hackle at the rear of the hook and wound some olive chenille forward and tied it off the head. And now I'm going to wind the hackle forward over the body like a rib. This is called palmering style. So when you hear about a palmered hackle, this is what we mean. And I normally keep the ribs spaced a little bit, just like a rib on the gold-ribbed hare's ear that we tied earlier. You don't want to jam them all the hackles at the back or jam them all at the front. Space them out nicely. This is a size 8 hook, and I've made about 5 turns on it. It's a rather simple fly, but a very effective one. It can imitate fish fly larvae, alder fly larvae, beetle larvae, and practically any insect when it's retrieved underwater. It's just a very good general all-around fly. Now here's a smaller version called the Griffith's gnat. This is used as a dry fly rather than a wet fly, and it imitates a lot of small insects, but it's particularly good for midge adults. Let me show you how to make a winged version of this dry woolly worm. I'm going to take a piece of lacquered turkey quill. It's been lacquered with head cement, just like we did for that yarn stonefly nymph, and trim it to a shape like this. Lay it right up on top of the hook, pointing over the back. Just press the hackle out of the way. Go around it a couple times loosely. Pull that tight. You notice as you look at this that the wing lies right down over the back. This is called a down wing style, and it is a very good representation of the tent-like wings of the adult caddisfly. It also makes a pretty good beetle imitation. Some people will trim the hackle off the bottom of these flies to get them float right down flush in the film. On real fast water, though, I wouldn't do that. I'd leave all that hackle right on there to help float it. Downwing caddises can also be tied with deer hair or elk hair. It's not necessary to use a feather every time. Caddises are normally tied in sizes 10 through 18. Their body colors are usually tan or green or brown. I'm going to select a clump of deer hair for this one, about this size. I'm using a size 10 hook. Simply snip it off the hide, and then I want to even up these little tips here. So I'm going to grab a hold of those, pull out this under fur, place the hair in this tool, which is called a stacker. You hold your finger over the end like that and simply whack it against the palm of your hand to the tabletop, and that evens the ends very nicely. This stacked hair is then laid up on top of the hook in the downwing style. Then hold the wing very firmly with your left hand Take a couple turns around loosely with the thread and then pull. Look at the deer hair spring out. Don't let go at this time. If you do, it'll just spin right around the hook. Secure it with several more wraps. Then pull this big clump backward and wrap the head in front. This particular fly is very good on fast broken water because that hair wing sticks up there and makes it very easy for you to see it. It also helps the fly to float well. Now we're going to have to cut off all this extra material. So I'm just going to grab that. And when I cut it off, I leave just a small amount stick up to form the head of the fly. And that's called the elk hair or deer hair caddis. Now here's a larger version tied on a long shank hook that represents a stonefly adult. It's a very simple pattern. It's easy to see out on the water, it floats well, and it's every bit as effective as more complicated patterns. The last fly style I'm going to show you is a minnow imitation. It's tied with a hair wing or a feather wing and a tinsel body. These are tied on elongate hooks to represent the long body of the minnow, and we begin by wrapping the hook shank with thread and bringing it forward to the back of the head. Notice that I've left extra space here for the head. It's about twice the length of the eye. And I'm going to tie in a piece of silver tinsel. This is a size 6 streamer hook, so I'm using a piece of rather wide tinsel. In this case, silver tinsel. Simply wrap it in even turns to the back of the hook. Once you get to the back of the shank, you turn around and wrap forward right over the first layer. This gives you a double layer, which makes a little stronger body, but it also closes up any small spaces you might have to hide the thread. You notice that I'm using black thread on this particular fly, and that's because most minnows have a very dark colored head. When a minnow is frightened, it flares its gills and shows a lot of red. So I'm going to tie a red throat on this fly. I've taken a small piece of red craft fur, just pulled it off, and I'm going to put it right under there for a throat. I just use the pinch technique. Pinch the thread, pull it straight up. Pinch, pull straight up. Then I'm going to trim it off underneath and wrap that down solidly. Now for the wing, you could use white calf tail, white bucktail, or maybe even fake hair like this. I'm going to select some white craft fur. It's an acrylic material, and you can see how it sparkles and shines, and in the water it very closely matches the sparkle of the minnow. Now you have to cut off a fair-sized chunk of this because there's a lot of short material in here, and I normally pull out the long ones, sort of pull them out and break them off, and then pull out all the short material like that. Get rid of that. And then hold it right on top. Measure it so it's just a little beyond the bend of the hook like that. Hold it right on the top. Again, use the pinch technique. And tie it in right at the back of the head. Go around there 6 or 7 times. Then with your scissors, trim off the excess material in a tapered fashion toward the back of the head. This will allow you to wrap a very nicely tapered head on the fly. And then begin and wrap it down nice and tight and nice and smooth. Cover up all the material that's showing. Like that. And of course, when you're finished, you put some head cement on it. Here are some variations on this minnow imitation theme. This one is tied with yellow hair. This one, you notice, has 3 layers of hair laid in. This one is dressed very thinly with just 2 hackling feathers for the wing for very low clear water conditions. A heavy fly like this might be used in heavier water. Here's a fly that has a little bit of mylar tinsel in the wing to give the sparkle and glitter like the side of a minnow. This one has marabou plumes tied in for the wing, and these will wave and undulate in the water, look very much like a swimming minnow. The muddler minnow is the most successful minnow imitation ever devised. I'm going to show you how to tie a muddler head. I've wrapped the body with gold tinsel, and now I'm going to take a piece of deer body hair in natural color and select a clump about the size of a pencil when it's compressed. simply snip that off the hide. Then I'm going to sort of measure it against the hook, and it should be about that long relative to the hook. And then trim these ends so they're nice and square. And lay that up on the hook with the ends about even with the bend back here. And hold it right up on top. Then take 2 loose turns of thread, 1, 2, and then pull. Now watch the deer hair start to flare. When it just starts to flare like that, I let go. Then wrap right through that point, right through there, and then wrap through the deer hair, right up to the eye of the hook. Make sure that's crowded back nicely, so you have a little space at the head. Now we're going to have to give it a haircut. The trick for trimming these muddler heads is to cut from the back of the fly, like this, cutting this way. With a pair of good sharp scissors, trim it down into a cone shape. After you get adept at tying this particular style of head, you may want to add an underwing of hair or feather fibers or something like that. You can also use this particular style on the body of flies like the irresistible. Another fly that you can tie using this head style is a grasshopper. You put on a dubbed body so it'll float a little better, an underwing of turkey quill to simulate the wings of the grasshopper, and then a trimmed deer hair head. Oh, that's a nice cutthroat. Ooh, lively one. There he goes. Tying your own flies is not only fun and relaxing, but it'll make you a more successful fly fisher because you become intimately acquainted with the fish and its food organisms. Study the techniques I've shown you in this tape and put them into practice. Then step out of your fly tying room into a beautiful stream like this and catch a fish on a fly of your own making.
If it's excitement you're after, come fishing with the experts from 3M Scientific Anglers and learn ways to catch more and bigger trout on the fly. You'll learn where to find trout in a stream and ways to present the right fly with the perfect cast so you can catch the most elusive trout during hatch and non-hatch situations. Plus, there's steelheading for 20-pound rainbows or going for the ultimate saltwater challenge. Let 3M Scientific Anglers bring home the excitement while you learn a lifetime of mastery techniques that will help you become the best fly fisherman you can be. There's no other sport like fly fishing. It can truly give you a lifetime of discovery and enjoyment. Whether you fish your own favorite stream or travel the world with your fly rod, there's no end to what you'll learn. To help speed you along your path of discovery, Scientific Anglers from 3M has recruited some of the world's best fly fishermen to produce a complete learning system of videotape programs. Unlike simple how-to videos, the Scientific Anglers Mastery Series shows you more than just tips. It gives you an easy-to-learn formula for success to truly help you become a master angler. There are programs designed to give you a strong foundation of knowledge and skill. At the next level, the Mastery System helps you integrate the skills and knowledge into sophisticated fly fishing strategies. And for the expert, there are challenge-level programs that offer original and innovative techniques to help you master the most difficult fly fishing situation. Think of it as a learning path towards fly fishing mastery. The tape you just viewed is part of that path. In Doug Swisher's Trout series, Scientific Anglers presents a 4-part program that features a natural learning progression. First, there's basic fly casting, where you learn loop control and the principles of throwing a perfect straight-line cast. Then you move on to advanced fly casting, building your skills with more complex casting techniques, including curve and reach casts. Now you're ready for action as Strategies for Selective Trout shows you how to fish a hatch from bottom to top. And you'll almost feel the strike as Doug demonstrates ways to take difficult trout in non-hatch conditions. Finally, in Advanced Strategies for Selective Trout, Doug teaches you his most sophisticated methods, including ways to successfully fish the midge, how to unlock the mysteries of masking hatches, and special streamer tactics to catch big trout. You'll be part of the action as you look through the eyes of the expert and learn the real whys behind the mastery of fly fishing for trout. While you're improving your streamside skills, you may also want to learn to tie your own flies. Gary Borger shows you a step-by-step approach to the basics of fly tying. And Doug Swisher demonstrates how to tie flies to match the hatch and his deadly attractor patterns. If you're hooked on catching the big ones, you've got to see the 4-part series on fly fishing for Pacific steelhead. Lonnie Waller and Jim Teeney will provide you with a complete arsenal of skills so that you can take these giant rainbows, even in the most challenging conditions. But that's not all. Scientific Anglers takes you south to watch world record holder Billy Pate demonstrate his secrets of success for hooking up and landing the ultimate fly fishing game. And if you love fishing, hunting, and other sports, think of 3M as your total video resource for outdoor adventure. Explosive action, in-depth information, incredible scenes. 3M Sportsman's Video Collection brings you the world of bass fishing with America's top anglers like Doug Hannon, Ricky Klein, and Al Linder. A comprehensive learning series that'll make you the best bass angler on your lake. You'll be glad you watch these programs when you catch the bass of a lifetime. The gentle beauty of a deep forest glade. The heart-pounding excitement of a trophy buck in rut. Going one-on-one with North America's most popular big game animal. That's what deer hunting's all about. And nobody brings you more in-depth information and true-life action than the 3M Sportsman's Video Collection. The excitement of calling a bird into your gun. The satisfaction of making a clean shot. And the companionship of a well-trained dog. If you like the challenge of upland game bird and waterfowl hunting, 3M Sportsman's Video Collection gives you the thrill of being there and the knowledge you need to master the sport.